It's time you remembered who kept this family together while you were off playing office. My cousin Diane said it to me in the private reading room at Hartwell & Associates. $4,260,000 sitting in a trust ledger on the table between us, and then she smiled like she had just handed me a gift. Her husband Rick nodded beside her, adjusting his watch band the way he does when he's nervous, loosening it a quarter inch, then tightening it back. Her sister Margot set down her oat milk latte and crossed her arms. And I said nothing. I just turned the glass of sparkling water in my hand, watched the bubbles climb, and let the silence stretch until Diane's smile started to thin at the edges. Because what she did not know, what none of them knew, was that the no contest clause in Section 12 of my grandparents' trust had already been triggered. They had triggered it themselves 3 weeks ago when they filed the capacity challenge. And in 47 minutes, the attorney was going to read the distribution aloud, and every single one of them was going to walk out of this room with nothing. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to the phone call that started it. My name is Amelia Collins. I am a trust compliance administrator, which means I spend my days cross-referencing amendments, logging filings, and reading the clauses in trust documents that nobody else bothers to read. I have been doing that work for my grandparents' trust for 6 years, not because anyone thanked me, because someone had to, and I was the one who understood how the paperwork fit together. And if you've ever been the person who holds the family together while everyone else takes credit, you already know what I mean. You know that feeling, right? When you've been the responsible one so long that nobody remembers you're allowed to stop? When the gratitude dried up around year 2, and by year 6, the only thing they notice is that you didn't do it fast enough, or cheerfully enough, or in exactly the way they imagined. That was my life, and it was about to get much worse. The deeper problem wasn't the money. The money was the surface. The deeper problem was that I had spent 6 years being invisible labor, and the moment I stopped being useful to them, I became the obstacle. But I'll get to that. Let me take you back 11 months to a Thanksgiving dinner at my Uncle Gerald's house, where all of this started with a sentence that sounded like a compliment and was actually a leash. Gerald's dining room had a mahogany table that seated 10, and every Thanksgiving, all 10 seats were full. The good china came out. The candles were the tall, taper kind Grandma used to buy at the farmer's market in October, the ones that smelled faintly of bay leaf. I remember that smell when I was 8, standing on a step stool in Grandma's kitchen, flour on the counter, cinnamon in the air, the oven timer ticking like a small mechanical heart. She would let me stir the cranberry sauce and call me her little compliance officer because I insisted on counting every cranberry that went into the pot. That kitchen was warm. Gerald's dining room was not. The food was the same, more or less. Turkey, stuffing, the green bean casserole with the fried onions on top. But nobody relaxed. Nobody leaned back in their chair and laughed until their stomach hurt. Gerald sat at the head of the table and cleared his throat before every sentence, this small 2-beat cough, like a gavel, and the conversation rearranged itself around him. Diane sat to his right. Rick sat to her right, adjusting his watch band. Margot sat across from me, folding her cloth napkin into smaller and smaller squares. And then Diane raised her glass, tapped it with a fork, and said, "We need to talk about the trust." She looked at me when she said it, not at Gerald. At me. "Amelia, you have been doing such a wonderful job with the compliance filings, and we are so proud of you." She said proud the way you say it to a child who colored inside the lines. "But the family has been discussing it, and we think it is time for a change. We think it is time the beneficiaries had a more active role in how the trust is managed." Gerald cleared his throat. "Your grandparents would have wanted the family involved." I set down my fork. "The trust is irrevocable as of 2019. The management structure is set by the document." Right, Diane said, waving her hand. "But the document can be interpreted, and we think you have been a little too rigid." A little too rigid. 6 years of reading every clause, filing every report, making sure the trust stayed compliant with state regulations, and I was too rigid? A trust is a house. Every clause is a load-bearing wall. You pull one out because you don't like the wallpaper, and the whole structure comes down. I wanted to say that. I did not say it. I just picked up my fork again and ate a piece of turkey that had gone lukewarm. And if you're wondering why I didn't push back harder, why I just sat there and let them talk over me, here's the truth. I had spent so long being the one who kept the walls standing that I had forgotten I was allowed to walk out of the house. The phone call came 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, a Tuesday. I was at my desk at Hartwell & Associates, processing the quarterly compliance filing for the trust, when my phone buzzed, Diane's name on the screen. I almost didn't answer. You ever get a phone call where you know, before you pick up, that the person on the other end has already decided what you're going to say, and your actual words are just background noise to them? I picked up. Amelia, sweetheart. The word sweetheart did a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Rick and I have been talking, and we've decided that the trust needs new management. We're going to file a petition to have you removed as compliance administrator. Diane, you can't just file a petition to remove a compliance administrator. The role is defined in the trust document, Section 4, Subsection B. You had one job, and that was to stay out of the way. Her voice went flat, the sweetness draining out of it like water from a cracked glass. And you haven't done that. You've been hoarding what belongs to all of us. I have been filing paperwork. That's what a compliance administrator does. You're not a family member in this conversation, Amelia. You're an employee. Act like it. That was Rick, leaning into the phone. I could hear him in the background, his watch band clicking as he adjusted it. I said, you should talk to the attorney before you file anything. We already have. Diane's voice came back, bright again, the sweetness reattached. Do not worry about it. We will handle it. You just keep doing your little filing job and stay out of the way. She hung up. I sat at my desk, holding the phone, listening to the dial tone. Then I set it down, opened the shared cloud portal where all trust-related legal documents get uploaded, and went back to the quarterly filing. I will tell you something about compliance work that nobody outside it understands. You see everything. Every amendment, every writer, every notarized signature, every court stamps filing. You see it because it is your job to log it, to cross-reference it, to make sure the timestamps match and the notary commissions have not expired. You see the whole architecture of a family's money, and you say nothing because the document speaks for itself. Silence is not the same as surrender. 3 weeks after that phone call, I was processing the next quarterly filing when I saw it. A new document in the shared portal, court-stamped, time-stamped, filed by Diane Kessler, Richard Kessler, and Margot Ellingson as beneficiaries named in Schedule B, a formal capacity challenge. They were claiming Grandma was not of sound mind when she signed the final amendment in 2019. They were claiming the trust, as it stood, was invalid. I opened the file. 3 pages, notarized. Rick's signature on page 2, slightly smudged like he'd pressed too hard. Diane's signature on page 1, her handwriting looping and confident. Margot's on page 3, smaller, tucked near the bottom margin. I read it twice. Then I opened the trust document and scrolled to Section 12, Subsection C, the in terrorem clause, the no contest provision, written into the trust by my grandparents' attorney in 2011. It said in plain legal language that any beneficiary who formally contests the grantor's capacity, the trust's validity, or the trustee's authority forfeits their entire distribution. Entire. Not partial, not negotiable, entire. I stared at the screen. Nobody moved, or rather, I did not move. The office hummed around me. A printer whirred 2 cubicles down. Someone laughed in the break room, and I sat there with my hand flat on the mouse, looking at Section 12, Subsection C, and the court-stamped petition that had just triggered it. They had done this to themselves. I did not file that petition. I did not draft it or suggest it or hint that they should file it. They walked into the law office, sat down, and handed over their own signatures, and the clause did what the clause was designed to do. I closed the portal. I logged the document in the compliance register as required. I noted the filing date, the case number, the names. And then I went to get a glass of sparkling water from the break room refrigerator, and I drank it at my desk, watching the bubbles rise, and I did nothing else. Because what was I supposed to do? Call Diane and say, "Hey, you just zeroed out your own inheritance?" She had told me to stay out of the way. She had told me I was an employee, not a family member. She had told me I was hoarding what belonged to all of them. So I stayed out of the way. And here's the thing nobody tells you about boundaries. They do not feel like power. They feel like grief. You stand in the doorway of a burning house and you don't go back in, and everyone inside screams that you should, and you just stand there, and the heat hits your face, and you let it. I need you to understand something, and I need you to hear me clearly. I did not set a trap. I did not call an attorney and ask them to insert a clause. That clause was written in 2011 by a lawyer my grandparents hired in a document I had nothing to do with drafting. All I did was my job. I logged the filing, I noted the trigger, and I let the process run, because the process is what it is, and it does not care about your feelings, and it does not negotiate. The first pressure came 9 days later at a family dinner Gerald organized at a restaurant called the Copper Vine, a place with exposed brick walls and a wine list that went up to $340 a bottle. Diane ordered a $145 bottle of Cabernet without looking at the price. She just pointed at the name and said, "This one," and the waiter poured, and she drank. And she talked about the kitchen remodel she had already priced out. $38,000, new countertops, a farmhouse sink, a 6-burner range she had seen in a magazine. Nobody moved, or rather, I did not move. The office hummed around me. A printer whirred 2 cubicles down. Someone laughed in the break room, and I sat there with my hand flat on the mouse, looking at Section 12, Subsection C, and the court-stamped petition that had just triggered it. They had done this to themselves. I did not file that petition. I did not draft it or suggest it or hint that they should file it. They walked into the law office, sat down, and handed over their own signatures, and the clause did what the clause was designed to do. I closed the portal. I logged the document in the compliance register as required. I noted the filing date, the case number, the names. And then I went to get a glass of sparkling water from the break room refrigerator, and I drank it at my desk, watching the bubbles rise, and I did nothing else. Because what was I supposed to do? Call Diane and say, "Hey, you just zeroed out your own inheritance?" She had told me to stay out of the way. She had told me I was an employee, not a family member. She had told me I was hoarding what belonged to all of them. So I stayed out of the way. And here's the thing nobody tells you about boundaries. They do not feel like power. They feel like grief. You stand in the doorway of a burning house and you don't go back in, and everyone inside screams that you should, and you just stand there, and the heat hits your face, and you let it. I need you to understand something, and I need you to hear me clearly. I did not set a trap. I did not call an attorney and ask them to insert a clause. That clause was written in 2011 by a lawyer my grandparents hired in a document I had nothing to do with drafting. All I did was my job. I logged the filing, I noted the trigger, and I let the process run, because the process is what it is, and it does not care about your feelings, and it does not negotiate. The first pressure came 9 days later at a family dinner Gerald organized at a restaurant called the Copper Vine, a place with exposed brick walls and a wine list that went up to $340 a bottle. Diane ordered a $145 bottle of Cabernet without looking at the price. She just pointed at the name and said, "This one." And the waiter poured, and she drank. And she talked about the kitchen remodel she had already priced out. $38,000. New countertops, a farmhouse sink, a 6-burner range she had seen in a magazine. "Grandma would have wanted us to have a nice kitchen," she said, as if Grandma's ghost was standing behind the waiter, nodding approval. "Grandma would have wanted you to read the trust document before you filed a capacity challenge," I said. The table went quiet. Gerald cleared his throat. Rick adjusted his watch band. Margot folded her napkin into a tiny square, then unfolded it, then folded it again. "You are being very hostile, Amelia," Diane said. "We are trying to do this as a family. You filed a legal petition claiming Grandma was not of sound mind. That is not a family conversation. That is a courtroom filing. You are hoarding what belongs to all of us," Diane said. Second time she had used that exact sentence. I noticed. I always noticed. "You are not a family member in this conversation," Rick added, leaning forward. "You are an employee. Act like it." Second time he had said that too. I wondered if they rehearsed. Gerald set down his fork. "Your grandparents would be ashamed of how you were handling this." I looked at Gerald. I looked at the way he held his wine glass a little too tightly, the way his knuckles went pale. I thought about the rumors I'd heard, the ones Margot had let slip at Thanksgiving, about Gerald borrowing against his retirement, about the quiet calls from a collection agency he kept silencing. He needed his daughters to get the trust money so they could help him out without it looking like he had failed, and he needed me to step aside so the money could flow. I finished my glass of sparkling water. The bubbles were almost gone. "I will think about it," I said, and I left. The second pressure came by phone 4 days later. Rick this time. No Diane in the background. Just Rick, his voice lower, more careful, the voice of a man who had been told to handle it and was trying very hard to sound reasonable. "Amelia, I want you to understand that this is nothing personal. Diane and I have obligations. We have a business that needs capital by March. We have a partner who is expecting a return, and the trust is the only asset that can cover it." "The trust is not your asset, Rick. It's the grandparents' trust. The distribution is set by the document. The distribution can be challenged. It already has been. You filed the challenge. You should know what the document says about challenges." A pause. I heard him adjust his watch band, the small metallic click. "Look, I'm going to give you one chance to do the right thing here. Step down as compliance administrator, let the family manage the trust, and this all goes away." "I cannot step down. The role is defined in the trust document. I would have to be removed by the trustee, and the trustee is Hartwell and Associates." "Then we'll go to Hartwell." "You can try." He hung up. I sat in my apartment, in the kitchen, holding my phone, looking at the blue mug Grandma gave me the year I turned 12. It was chipped on the rim, a small crescent of missing ceramic, and I ran my thumb over the chip the way I had done 100 times. She had made me cocoa in that mug. She had called me her little compliance officer. And now her grandmother was trying to void her signature because she was angry about kitchen countertops. You can't audit someone's conscience. I thought about that. I turned it over. You can reconcile a ledger, you can cross-reference a filing, you can check a notary commission against a state registry, but you cannot open a person's chest and look at the wiring and say, "Here, this is where the greed is. This is where the love should be but is not." You cannot audit that, so you stop trying. The third pressure came in person. Gerald showed up at my apartment on a Saturday morning. No warning, no phone call. I opened the door and he was standing on the porch in his overcoat, the one with the missing button at the cuff, and he cleared his throat twice before he spoke. "Your grandparents would be ashamed," he said. Same line as the restaurant. He had a limited repertoire. "Come in, Uncle Gerald." He sat at my kitchen table. I poured him coffee. He did not drink it. He wrapped his hands around the mug and stared at the surface. "You have been hoarding this family's money for 6 years." There it was. Diane's accusation, recycled, same sentence structure, different voice. And I will not stand by and watch you keep it from the people it belongs to. I have been filing paperwork, Uncle Gerald. You have been controlling it. I have been maintaining compliance. He looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, and I realized, maybe for the first time, that he was frightened. Not angry, frightened. The collection agency calls, the borrowed retirement, the quiet math of a man who had spent more than he had and could not tell his daughters. He needed this to work. He needed Diane and Margot to get the money so they could hand some of it back to him and everyone could pretend the hole was not there. Amelia, he said, softer now. Family takes care of family. I almost laughed. I did not laugh. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water and sat across from him. Family takes care of family, I repeated. Yes, and part of taking care of family is not letting them walk into a legal buzzsaw because you are too proud to tell them the truth about your own debts. He flinched, just a little, a tightening around the mouth. Then he cleared his throat, stood up, and left without finishing the coffee. 2 weeks later, Diane called with what she described as a peace offering, a reconciliation dinner, a neutral restaurant, her treat, just the 4 cousins, no husbands, no Gerald. Let us talk this through like adults. Let us find a solution that works for everyone. I went. I should not have gone, but I went. The restaurant was called Linden's, a small place with linen napkins and a prix-fixe menu. Diane arrived first. She had already ordered wine for the table, a bottle of Sancerre, $62, and she was already talking to the waiter about the tasting menu when I sat down. I took the liberty of ordering for everyone, she said. The duck is incredible. Margot arrived next, sliding into the booth, folding her napkin into a triangle, then a smaller triangle, then unfolding it. She would not meet my eyes. And here is where the second layer of the ambush lived, the part I didn't see until later. Because while Diane was sitting across from me, pouring wine, talking about finding a solution, she had already sent a message to the wider family group chat. I saw it afterward, because Margot accidentally posted a screenshot into the wrong thread. Diane's message, time-stamped 40 minutes before the dinner, Amelia is being difficult about the trust. She is hoarding information and refusing to cooperate. We are meeting tonight to try to get through to her. If she doesn't come around, we will need to move forward with the removal. She was sitting across from me, smiling, pouring Sancerre, telling me she wanted a solution. And in the same hour, she was telling the family I was the problem. The dual-layered ambush. Lie to me at the table, lie to them in the chat. Both at once. Both true in her mind, because in Diane's version of events, she was the reasonable one, and I was the obstacle. And the 2 stories did not contradict each other. They reinforced each other. She talked about the Scottsdale property she wanted to buy. 2 bedrooms, a courtyard, a view of the mountain. She talked about Margot's kids' tuition, the private school she had already toured. She talked about Rick's business, the partner who was expecting capital by March. She talked about all of this as if the money was already in her account, as if the distribution had already been read, as if the only remaining step was for me to get out of the way. And I sat there, drinking my sparkling water, and I said very little. In the parking lot afterward, Margot caught my arm. She was holding her coat closed with both hands, and her eyes were wet. Amelia, I want you to know I did not want this. Diane said it was the only way. She said if we did not challenge the trust, you would find a reason to keep the money. Did you read Section 12 before you signed the petition? She blinked. There are a lot of sections. Did you read Section 12? No. I nodded. I got in my car. I drove home. And I did not call Diane. I did not call Rick. I did not call Gerald. I called Nadia Okofa, my college roommate, who works in commercial leasing and cracks her knuckles one at a time when she is thinking. She picked up on the second ring. I told her everything, the petition, the clause, the dinner, the group chat message, all of it. She was quiet for a while. Then she cracked her index knuckle. then her middle. You do not owe them a performance of fairness. You do not have to warn them. You do not have to manage their feelings. You do not have to be the one who catches them before they fall. You just have to do your job. I know. And your job is to file the paperwork and let the document speak. Yes, then let it speak. I saw Dr. Vasquez the following Thursday. She was stirring her tea, the spoon still in the cup, going round and round, the small metallic sounds filling the silence between us. You look tired, she said. I am tired. You feel responsible for them. I feel responsible for the trust. There's a difference, but they don't see one. And if the trust distributes 0 to them because of a clause they triggered themselves, do you carry that? I thought about it. The spoon going round, the tea getting cold. No, I said. And I meant it. Or I was starting to. The morning of the reading, I arrived at Hartwell & Associates at 8:15. Tomas was at the reception desk, a pencil tucked behind his ear, sorting mail into small stacks. He looked up and smiled. Miss Collins, good morning. Mr. Aldos is prepping the distribution sheets. Can I get you anything? Sparkling water if you have it. Coming right up. He brought me a glass, cold, the bubbles rising in quick silver threads. I held it in both hands and let the cold seep into my palms. And if you were sitting there thinking you would have handled it differently, maybe you would have. Maybe you would have called Diane and said, please do not file that petition, you will lose everything. Maybe you would have driven to her house and sat on her porch and begged. Maybe you would have been kinder than I was. But you were not in that room. You had not spent 6 years being told you were an employee, not family. You had not been told to stay out of the way by the people who were walking directly into the way. You had not sat at a dinner table and listened to someone spend your grandparents' money on kitchen countertops while calling you a hoarder. I am not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because I need you to understand why, when the moment came, I did not warn them. I was not cruel, I was tired, and there is a difference even if it looks the same from the outside. Mortar does not get thanked, it just gets painted over. I had been the mortar between bricks that did not want to be a wall, and I was done being painted over. At 9 o'clock, Diane and Rick and Margot walked into the reading room. Gerald was not with them. He had called in sick, so Diane said. I suspected he couldn't face it. He had borrowed too much, and the retirement hole was his own, and no trust distribution was going to fix it, and I think some part of him knew that. Diane sat down and arranged her manila folder on the table. She smoothed the corners, aligned the edges, straightened the papers inside. She had already priced the kitchen. She had already toured the Scottsdale property. She had already promised Margot's kids a school. She looked at me and smiled. I looked at my glass of sparkling water. The bubbles were still rising. Mr. Aldos entered. He was in his 60s, gray-haired, unhurried. He set a stack of printed sheets on the table. He removed his glasses, cleaned them with a cloth from his breast pocket, and put them back on. He did not look at Diane. He did not look at me. He looked at the document. Good morning. I am here to read the distribution of the Hartwell Family Revocable Living Trust as amended in 2019. I will read the relevant sections aloud. Please direct any questions to me after the reading is complete. Diane leaned forward. Rick adjusted his watch band. Margot folded her napkin into a square. Mr. Aldos turned to page 1. He read the preamble. He read the schedule of assets. $4,260,000. He read the names of the beneficiaries. Diane Kessler, Richard Kessler, Margot Ellison, Gerald Kessler, Amelia Collins. And then he turned to page 2.
Section 12, Subsection C, the interim provision. Any beneficiary named in Schedule B who formally contests the grantor's testamentary capacity, the validity of this trust, or the authority of the appointed trustee shall forfeit in full any and all distribution rights under this instrument. He paused. He removed his glasses. He cleaned them again. He put them back on. Section 12, Subsection C, The filing of said challenge triggers automatic and irrevocable forfeiture of distribution for the filing beneficiaries. Diane's hand went to her manila folder. She opened it. She closed it. She opened it again. The distribution to Diane Kessler is 0. The distribution to Richard Kessler is 0. The distribution to Margot Ellison is 0. Nobody moved. Rick's hand went to his watch band. He loosened it. He tightened it. He loosened it again. Margot's napkin was folded so small it was the size of a postage stamp. Diane's acrylic nail pressed into the leather blotter on the table, leaving a faint white scratch mark. Mr. Aldos turned to page 3. The distribution to Gerald Kessler, who did not file a challenge and is not a party to the petition, proceeds as outlined in Schedule A. A pause. However, Mr. Kessler's distribution is subject to an existing lien filed by First Meridian Lending against his retirement account, dated 6 months prior to this reading. The net distribution after lien satisfaction is $14,200. And then he looked at me. The distribution to Amelia Collins, as the remaining beneficiary named in Schedule B, who did not file a challenge, proceeds as outlined in the trust document. The full balance after administrative costs and the above distributions transfers to Amelia Collins. He set the sheets down. He removed his glasses one more time. He folded the cleaning cloth into a small square and placed it in his breast pocket. That concludes the reading. If there are questions, my office is available to schedule a follow-up. Diane stared at him. Then she stared at me. Her mouth opened. Her mouth closed. The acrylic nail was still pressed into the blotter, the white scratch mark deepening. "You knew," she whispered. "I knew the clause existed. I did not know you were going to file the petition. You told me to stay out of the way, so I stayed out of the way. You could have warned us. You told me I was not a family member. You told me I was an employee. Employees do not give legal counsel to the people who told them to stay out of the way." Rick stood up. His chair scraped against the floor. "This is not over. We will contest this." "Mr. Kessler," Mr. Aldo said, calm, flat, no edge in his voice at all. "You have already contested the trust. That is what triggered the clause. Contesting the result of the contest would require a separate legal action, and I would strongly advise you to consult independent counsel before filing anything further." His tone was the tone of a man reading a weather report. No judgment, no satisfaction, just the facts, delivered in a steady, unbothered voice. Rick sat down. His watch band clicked. Margot was crying, quietly, folding and unfolding the tiny napkin square. She would not look at me. She would not look at Diane. She looked at the table. And Diane looked at me, and her face did something complicated. Anger, and beneath the anger, fear. The $187,000 in debt. The boutique franchise that had failed. The kitchen she would never remodel. The Scottsdale property she would never tour. All of it gone, because she had walked into a law office and signed a petition she had not read the consequences of. I picked up my glass of sparkling water. The bubbles were gone. The water was flat. I set the glass down on the table, gently, the way you set down something you have been carrying for a long time. "You will remember who kept this family together while you were off playing office." I said it back to her, word for word. The same sentence she had handed me in this room 47 minutes ago in a lifetime that belonged to a different morning. I said it softly, without heat, without triumph. Just the words returned, like a letter sent back to the sender. Diane's hand dropped from the manila folder. The folder slid off the table and hit the carpet with a soft, flat sound. I stood up. I picked up my coat. I walked to the door. And on my way out, I stopped at the reception desk. Tomas looked up, pencil behind his ear. "Could I get a black coffee to go?" I said. "Of course, Miss Collins." He poured it. I took it. I walked out into the parking lot. The air was cold. The sky was the flat gray of a January morning. And I stood there, holding the coffee, and I breathed. I did not gloat. I did not feel triumph.
I felt the specific, quiet exhaustion of someone who has been holding up a wall for 6 years and has finally been allowed to set it down. The document had already spoken. I just let it finish. 3 days later, Margot sent me a text. 2 sentences. "I am sorry. I should have read the document before I signed." I texted back, "I know." And that was enough. Not forgiveness exactly, acknowledgement. The small, necessary act of saying, yes, this happened, and yes, it hurt, and yes, we are still 2 people who used to build blanket forts in Grandma's living room. Diane did not apologize. Diane sent a message a week later. "You will regret this. Family takes care of family, remember?" I did not respond. I did not need to. The sentence had lost its teeth. It was just a sentence now, just air. Gerald's retirement borrowing was exposed 2 months later in a way that had nothing to do with me. First Meridian Lending sent a notice to the family. The hole was bigger than anyone knew. His downfall had started long before I sat in the reading room. I did not cause it. I did not accelerate it. I was simply the person in the room when the math finally caught up with him. And look, I will tell you what freedom sounds like. It sounds like a glass of sparkling water set down on a table, the bubbles gone, the glass empty, your hands finally open. I still work at Hartwell & Associates. I still file the quarterly reports. I still read every clause, every rider, every amendment. But I don't do it for them anymore. I do it because it's my work, and my work is good, and I'm allowed to be good at something without being punished for it. Here's the thing about trust documents that most people never learn, and I need you to hear this because it might save you. If you're a beneficiary of a trust or an estate, before you file